Okay, well, good morning, everybody. We're happy to be here this morning. We just wanted to give everybody kind of a intro to some TRAPS advocacy, talk about the Walk the Halls event that's coming up. We've got a great panel of guests here to kind of walk you through the process if this is your first time, or maybe this is a second or third time you're getting involved and want to go a little bit further. So my name is Jeff O'Shea. I'm the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Harker Heights, but I'm also the Legislative Committee Chair for TRAPS. And on the call, we have Kimberly Garrett, who is the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Georgetown, is a past president of TRAPS and is the Vice Chair of the Legislative Committee. We have Stacy Anaya, who is the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Louisville, is also a past president, and is also a member of the TPWD, you're gonna have to correct me on it, State Parks Committee?
State Park Advisory Committee. You got it.
We have Trent Kelly, who is the current president of TRAPS, and I'm sure he's got the countdown going already. He's the deputy director of Grapevine Parks and Recreation. We also have Jeff Miller, who, in addition to being the founder of Old Stone Strategy, is that right? Old Stone Strategy, has also worked for Representative Cyrier during the 2019 session. So through the sporting goods sales tax process, getting Prop 5 on the ballot in 2019, and has also worked on the Culture, Rec, and Tourism Committee for the Texas House of Representatives. And so is going to bring some insight kind of from the consultant side and from the legislator's office side for you. So kind of help out there. And we have Aaron Franz, who's our executive director for the Texas Recreation and Park Society. So welcome all. Thank you all for being on the call this morning. And I'm gonna share my screen really quick just to give a really quick intro into some TRAPS advocacy. So maybe. All right, so just really quickly, the Legislative Committee represents TRAPS in addressing legislative issues, policies, and procedures relating to the park and recreation movement. So anything that's going on federally or at the state level, or even maybe sometimes within your Parks Board or councils, the Legislative Committee can provide guidance there. As we know, in Texas, our municipalities, our counties, we derive our powers as it be from the state legislature. And so what goes on in Austin is really important to each and every one of our communities and each and every one of our departments. So the TRAPS Legislative Committee is kind of at the forefront of that in trying to keep our membership informed, to keep involved in the process, which can get pretty complex. Speaking of that process, if you'd like to, the Texas Legislative Council puts together a really good document every year. This is the most updated one on the legislative process in Texas. So this can kind of help guide you through what the legislative process looks like, what passing a bill looks like. It's a really good and quick way to kind of give yourself an idea of what things look like in Austin. What does advocacy look like for us? It could look like many different things. So you see here, this was our play day at the Capitol last spring, where we just went to the Capitol, did what Parks and Rec professionals do. We had fun, we set up games, we had lunch. We kind of hung out with our legislators, hung out with their staff, and made a fun day out of it. But it could also mean testifying in support of Texas Parks and Wildlife funding, like we've done two separate occasions last year on the Committee on Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, and then the Appropriations Committee. But it could also look like playing a movie like Deep in the Heart, which is a movie about Texas conservation efforts at Wimberley. This was in Wimberley at Blue Hole Regional Park in Wimberley. They did a fantastic job. You can see a big crowd there. But it could also be, this is our mayor taking a proclamation dedicating or making it so that July was Parks and Recreation Month in Harker Heights. And I know several, almost all probably cities did something like that. That's advocacy. May not think about it like that, but you're advocating Parks and Recreation, advocating for Parks and Recreation in your community. Okay, so at the state level, we do several things. We go down to Austin several times every session, which meets every 2 years. And we talk with our legislators. We try to build relationships. But one of the biggest things that we do is we do our Walk the Halls event. And you can see up in the top right corner, that was our Walk the Halls event in 2019, which was the last time we actually got to do it. The lower left corner is 2017. And then you'll probably recognize the face masks and being outdoors from COVID during the 2021 session. We didn't have a Walk the Halls because of what was going on. And so we had our members go and meet their legislators where they are. So this was several of our members, including Kimberly Garrett, meeting with Representative John Busey at a park. So if you can't go to the Capitol to meet your legislators, the second best thing is to get them to your park and to talk about the importance of parks and recreation. So what are we advocating for this session? Pretty similar things to what we advocate for every session, which is protecting and enhancing our investments in all public parks and open spaces. That's through sporting goods sales tax. That's through not only cities and counties, but also the state creating access to public lands, different funding mechanisms, so fighting for those, ensuring that municipalities have the ability to truly govern and do what they need to do for the betterment of their communities. And then by improving health and wellness by supporting parks and recreation amenities and services. This is truly highlighted by the COVID pandemic. We saw that we are not only recreation providers, but we're also public health providers. And so that was brought to the forefront because of COVID. And as many of us are seeing, that has stayed that way even as we've come out of it. So that's what we're talking to our legislators about constantly, but in particular at our Walk the Halls event, which is coming up next. Let's see, I think that might be it. So make sure to mark your calendars, Thursday, January 26th. It's coming up pretty soon. So we're going to get into it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. And I'm going to first kick it over to Trent, our current president, to just kind of talk about generally TRAPS and the importance of advocacy to the organization.
Yeah, appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you. Thank you for putting this together. For myself, I think this is maybe the fourth time that I'll have participated in the Walk the Halls and beyond Walk the Halls. Advocacy is something that we're constantly doing for parks and recreation. And, it's so important because one, we're being a voice for the profession, but two, more importantly, we're being a voice for the residents, for those that we serve in the community and the state. And without us doing things like Walk the Halls, Play Day at the Capitol, meeting our reps in our parks, it really limits our voice. And if your voice is not heard, kind of like in relationships, it's really hard to say no to someone that you see all the time, that you built a friendship with, that you know. When they ask you something, you typically want to say yes to them, or you want to help them out. Same thing in advocacy. If we're never heard from, if we're never in front of people, it makes it easy to say no to us. But if we've built that relationship, we've invested the time, and again, we have to have a good, positive message that somebody buys into. But if we're there building those relationships, making those connections, they're much more eager or much more ready to support what we're asking.
That's such a great point, Trent. So one of the first things we get asked when we talk about legislative advocacy or just advocacy in general at a conference or workshop or anything is, how can I get involved? And the first thing you can do is figure out who your representatives are if you don't know. And once you have done that, build that relationship. So go visit their local office, go meet their staff there, get their phone numbers. That way, when you have these asks, you're asking somebody that you have developed a relationship with, exactly like you're saying, rather than somebody that you're meeting on that day. So if that question is going through your mind, how can I get involved in advocacy? And you haven't done that, you don't know who your legislators are, and you have not introduced yourself. That's the first thing.
Exactly.
Well, thanks, Trent. Let's hop right into Walk the Halls. And so we might have several folks that have some key insights on this, but I'm going to let Kimberly kind of lead us in what that day looks like, what that's going to look like for each group, and kind of how that goes for us. Kimberly?
Okay, yeah, so on the day of Walk the Halls, you're probably going to be a little nervous, especially if you've never done it, because you imagine you're talking to representatives and senators. They're elected officials, but they're people. They're just like you. But most likely, when we get there, we will break up into groups. You will have a group leader, someone who's seasoned, that has done this before, and Jeff was in my group years ago. And I started out the same way. In 2013 was my first Walk the Halls. So it's been 10 years, and that's how I really got my start in traps. I had an awesome group leader. They walked us through the process. The group leader will more than likely kind of take the lead and show you how you go into a legislator's office. You start a conversation. You bring that legislator to your, well, can't really think of the word I'm trying to say. You bring them to Parks and Rec. You have them remind them what it was like at their favorite park, or what, where they visited. When they go back to their childhood, do they have a great memory? So you kind of want to get on that even playing field. You want to get to talking about something that you're familiar with. You're familiar about Parks and Recreation. You're an advocate for Parks and Recreation. So you want to bring them to your level. And once you do that, you kind of diffuse the situation. You're really you want the legislator to know that you're their source for Parks and Recreation. If they have questions during the session that come up on a bill, you want to make sure you give them your card, your information, and let them know about traps and what our platform is and how we can support them. But we definitely want them to reach out to a Parks and Recreation professional if they have any questions about Parks and Rec, because we don't want them second guessing or calling someone from another profession that doesn't have our insight. So that, then after the group leader does it a couple of times and you get confident, they may ask you to start the conversation, knock on the door and go in. And sometimes you're going to just be talking to a staff member, which is fine. Sometimes those staff members are they're young college graduates. They're trying to get their foot in the door on legislation, and they're really easy to talk to. And a lot of times they're willing to listen. Sometimes they'll give you 5 minutes. Sometimes they'll welcome you in, sit on the couch. Do you want a cookie? Do you want something to drink? And you'll end up getting 15 to 20 minutes of their time. So don't be discouraged if you only get a little bit of time. They are busy. They have meetings. The session will have started. So don't get discouraged. It's just getting out there and trying and making those first conversations. And for me, I was really nervous as well. But once I got into that legislator's office and started talking about Parks and Recreation, I realized how much I knew and how passionate I was about our profession. And the words just kind of flowed. And it made me realize that I was pretty knowledgeable, and I wanted to share my passion with others. So I'm going to turn it over to someone else for their thoughts and experience.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, Kimberly, with going to that office and remembering that you're the expert. It's easy to go in there and think, I'm not familiar with the legislative process, so I'm just kind of really not knowledgeable about what I'm talking about here. But you don't have to go in there and talk about the legislative process. You're not going to talk politics. You're going to talk Parks and Recreation. And oftentimes when we go in and we have 4 or 5 people and you start talking about Parks and Recreation, you can kind of see most of the time, kind of their eyes light up, because you're not bringing something that's controversial into their office. You're bringing Parks and Rec. And so everybody has that story. About half the time you'll get asked if your job is like the show, which I think we all get asked all the time. So, and that's okay. Have that conversation and say, yes, it absolutely is. And that you're Ron Swanson or Leslie Knope or whatever. And then and then get into our asks as an organization. But you really are bringing a fun topic to their office. These are staffers that are faced with really tough topics every single day of the legislative session. And, there are some tough things that we have to tackle as a organization, but again, you have to remind yourself, we're talking Parks and Rec here. We're talking something that's widely popular with Texans. And so, that should kind of make things a little bit easier as you go. Anybody wanted to chime in on those experiences? I know I'm going to go to Jeff about kind of what this looks like from both sides of this coin.
Yeah, I can go ahead and jump in if you want me to at this point. So, I think, Kimberly, some of the things that you said were absolutely on point. Staff does matter. They are highly immersed in these, and sometimes more immersed in these issues and topics than the members themselves are. And their job is to advise these members. And so, a bill may be on the floor, or they're talking through things before session that day, and the staffer says, "Hey, I remember we met with Traps on this issue. This is an important one. We really connected on X, Y, or Z." Those conversations and being able to recall those conversations are highly important for the staff to be able to do. Some little things that I think I can mention is when you have those handouts, make sure you give those handouts to the member or the staff before you start even talking about things. The good members and the good staff, and that may not always be true, but a lot of times those members and staff want to be able to take notes on that handout, and for them to be able to have that recall based off of that handout and highlight a specific statistics that you've got, or whatever the case may be. Always make sure those handouts are in their hands as you're talking through whatever it is, and reference them as often as possible. We as staffers are given so much information on a daily basis that, if you can reference it, they can see it. That gives them that extra ability to remember it. They may never actually go back and reference that document again. So it's anytime that you can actually give that to them and kind of draw them to those conclusions, the more the better. The other thing that I'll say is, as you guys are not necessarily legislative professionals, y'all are, recreation and parks professionals. One of the things that I think y'all always consistently talk about is kind of the opposition to appropriations riders on, the local park grant program, and being able to tell them, hey, on appropriations night or on budget day, that you're going to have a bunch of these riders that come in and they appropriate money for local parks for whatever the city or whatever the county is. Those take money away from your municipalities or your cities to be able to do the work that they do. And a lot of these staffers have helped write some of those letters of recommendations to Parks and Wildlife. And so if you can recall back to that as well and be able to say, you write these letters, in support of our park grants, and if you vote for these during the appropriations process, we have less money to access for our local parks. That is going to give them, and hopefully that helps them remember on appropriations day that, most of the members go up there and they're yeses on a bunch of things. But if you can tell them, hey, this is something that's important to us, we're going to ask you to oppose any of those riders, that may be helpful and beneficial to them as well. If you can follow back up with some of those members or staff after the meeting with an email or a text message or whatever it is, that's always helpful, to be able to have that additional contact. But as Jeff was saying, it's all about making that relationship and having that relationship with that member and that staff. And, maybe that starts in that office on that day, but if you can continue to have that relationship with them, the more the merrier. So.
Yeah, that's so helpful, Jeff. And I would say the same for you when you're visiting a legislator's office, is be ready to take notes as well, because some legislators or some staffers may have gone through that process of writing a letter of recommendation for a local parks grant, and may be more familiar with what we're talking about than others. That's a good thing to note, to say, hey, this person had interest in this. This office had worked on a project for this. They're an advocate of ours. And giving that to the legislative committee, so that that's something that not only you can follow up on as a professional, but that the legislative committee can follow up on as well.
And I'll say, in my conversations with members and staff, Primarily, it's the staff that remembers those letters of recommendation. Obviously, the members sign them and remember them as well, but the staff are putting the blood, sweat, and tears into some of those letters and doing the work on them. And so I have not met a single office that does not remember writing at least one of those letters of recommendation. So always a good thing to be able to recall and bring back up for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we don't ask anybody to be, when they go to walk the halls, we give you the tools that you need to go in there and have a conversation with the legislator. I will say it is a fantastic idea to get on the legislative page of the TRAPS website and take a look at the platform and at least familiarize yourself with that. The first topic on that platform is just what Jeff was talking about, the appropriation riders to the local parks grant. So if you're not familiar with what he was just referencing, very important to get familiar with that. And again, there's 3 or 4 sentences on that topic. It's the first thing on that platform.
Hey, Jeff, following up on that, I think one of the great lines that we can use in any visit and to be sure to have in your hip pocket is if they ask you a question you don't know, don't conjecture. Say, you know what, I don't know, but let me follow up with you, because then it opens up that door for that follow up and there's an action point coming out of that. Also, we don't want to give them any contradicting information to what is either on our platform or if it's specific to that representative's area to what's going on in the local community. So you've got those opportunities as well.
Absolutely. There's a reason they're asking. They want the answer. And so that's our job to get them the answer. Kimberly was just talking about that. Make sure that when you leave, they know that you're their contact for Parks and Recreation. And if it's a topic that maybe you don't feel comfortable with and you want to forward that to the legislative committee or somebody that you know that's a part of it, that's fine. But if you're okay taking that call and being, building that relationship with your legislator, especially, that's a really good idea. Any other points on that? Aaron, I know that you have some experience in kind of working with other organizations and working with legislators' offices through other organizations outside of TRAPS. Do you have any insight on those relationships as well?
I mean, I think you guys have all, touched on it, but it truly is what we do every day in Parks and Rec. It's just talking about what we do. And it's really, everybody in those offices, they are people just like us and they want to hear from us. That's their job, right? Our job is to go talk about Parks and Rec, and it's their job to listen to who comes through those doors. So I think regardless of the topic, when you're going down the legislative, they're there to listen to us. We as constituents put them there to advocate on our behalf. So it's incumbent upon us as members of TRAPS to really be the voice. And Kimberly, you talked about it. It's the passion. And every Park and Rec professional that I have met so far, that passion is deep and it shines through in every conversation. So it's just being yourself, going in and just sharing what you do every day. It matters. It makes a difference.
Yeah, that was highlighted during the play day last year when we were putting that all together. All of these Parks and Recreation professionals from different areas of the state got together and we're trying to talk about what we're going to do for this event. And within a meeting, we had an entire event, scheduled and who was going to bring what out of their recreation trailer or van, or who was going to bring this and who was providing tents and all that stuff. And so, people that do this day to day were willing to put all this together to make that event happen. And so you really see the passion of Parks and Recreation professionals. All right. Fantastic. Well, let's hop over to Stacy to kind of talk about TPWD and how they fit into all this, how State Parks fits into this. Obviously, TPWD administering the local parks grant, which is something that we're fighting for. So if you can kind of talk about that relationship between TRAPS and TPWD during this process.
Right. Thanks. So back in the day, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department used to be big members with TRAPS. Like back in the 1990s, early 2000s. And then there was some legislation that was passed that kind of put the kibosh on that because we couldn't, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department employees couldn't lobby for something that was linked to their funding. And because TRAPS served as the main lobbying arm for the sales tax program, there was some nebulousness on what that relationship would be. And then while it couldn't be formal any longer, we still kept a strong relationship with the TPWD team, making sure that we understood how their budget request as it related to the local parks grant that stayed intact. And now we've kind of been able to, with the new leadership at TPWD, kind of reestablish that relationship, even though it's not necessarily formal with TRAPS. I do know that, you know, Rodney serves as an ex officio on the board, helping just keep us in contact, not only with what's going on funding, but what's going on with TPWD in general, because you have to remember that in this amazing continuum of public space in the nation, they are that link between local and county public spaces and that great national park and public land system, right? And that's what we're trying to connect people with. And so you've got that connection there. Excuse me. The other thing is to remember is that that money, as we've stated, trickled down to us through the local grant program, and it really helps boost our efforts to provide public space. And as we work through what those what the amount is in our budget and figuring out how we can further that our own efforts, making sure that they understand what those riders do to our efforts to competitively go after them. We also have opportunities not only in Walk the Halls, but at your ribbon cuttings for all of these parks that are supported by the local park grant funds, even ones that aren't. Invite your legislatures out to attend those, because then when you walk into their office, they have that link. Oh, you know what? I know who that person is. They're the Leslie Knope of Louisville, or they're the Juan Swanson of Harker Heights, right? They're passionate. But they also remember that we offer a platform for them to connect with more of their constituents, right? That's what parks are. They're common spaces for people to come together, even the politicians. So when you get an opportunity, remember that. It's also a good opportunity to invite our representatives and in TPWD to those platforms as well, so that we can make that connection between those two programs. So, you know, it's not only how we work legislatively with TPWD, but also how we practically work with them to build our new spaces, but to introduce our participants to those public and state parks in our regions as well.
Yeah, it makes it easy to remember when TPWD does well, we're doing well. And so that's, we want to advocate for TPWD, one, because we're fans of parks. And so we want our Parks and Wildlife Department here in the state of Texas to do well, to be well funded, to be successful. But then, yes, that money comes through the local parks grant, and several of you on this call, you may not even know it, because some of them may have been awarded several years ago, but your community has probably benefited from that program at some point. I'm sitting in a recreation center right now that was built with that local park grant. So that's one of the main things that you will be given at Walk the Halls, is a document for every office that you go in. We have a list of local park grant awards by district. And so you'll be able to hand that legislator a list of, these are the awards historically that have gone to communities within your district. And that's the most powerful piece of information that we have in what we're talking about. So yes, thank you so much, Stacy. And so Stacy has a great relationship with TPWD through her roles with them and in her time as president. And so we're very grateful to have her expertise on that. Okay, anything else on that? Okay, well, we look forward to seeing you all at Walk the Halls. Before we go, did anybody have any last bits of wisdom for our viewers?
The practical, wear comfortable shoes. This is not a fashion show. This is how far we can get through that building. And remember, it's all granite. So No new shoes, no high heels.
I can attest to that. Yes.
Yep, I second that. I actually bought, they make dress shoes that look like sneakers now. I bought those because of this event a few years ago, and that's all I wear now, so.
Jeff,
Agreed.
I did have a question, and it may have been in your presentation, but since I can't refer back to it right now, what is the best place for people to go to if they're wanting to find out who their representative is to contact them before this event?
So you can generally Google who represents me Texas, and like the first or second link is a capital.texas.gov link that, you can go fill in some information and get straight to it.
And this QR code here will take you directly to it as well. So I'll leave it on here for a couple seconds if folks want to pull their phone out and use that. Very easy to find. Some of you may need to be aware that some of you may have a different representative. I do this year with redistricting. So it's a good idea, even if you think you know who your representative is, to still go to this link and make sure that it is the same as it has been in the past.
It's also on our traps.org website on the legislative tab. And when you'll scroll down the page, there's information and links that you might find helpful to go and understand, read more about our platform and initiatives. We've got white papers up there to kind of educate all of ourselves on. But there is a link for who represents me to kind of take you to the website as well.
And if there are generally questions, the legislation and advocacy page on the TRAPS website has as much information as we can get on. We don't want to overload it, but it's got a lot of good stuff on there. Okay, y'all. Well, we look forward to seeing you all on Thursday, January 26th. Be there at, I think, by 10 a.m. We start at 10 a.m. So if you're traveling in, make accommodations, give yourself some time. It'll probably go from about 10 a.m. to generally 4 p.m. Depends on how long you talk to some of those legislative staffers. If you have a relationship with some staff and you want to make an appointment, certainly you can do that. RSVP for the event so that we know how many folks are coming. We can try to create those groups beforehand. And if you have made an appointment with somebody, let us know. That will help us in putting our groups together. And if you have any other questions, you can certainly contact me or anybody else on this call. And my contact information is on the legislation and advocacy page. So thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you to our panel members for having this discussion. And we look forward to seeing you on January 26th.